Hey there, gang. It's Gray here. Been a long couple of weeks of cold, rain, and cloudy weather patterns. So it's the first day we're getting some actual sun out in the DFW area. So I'm just hanging out by the creek, soaking in the sun, and enjoying nature. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about integrated pest management, what it is, and how it can be incorporated in your garden. So the reason why I want to talk about integrated pest management is because we're on the precipice of spring. And usually around this time of year, I start seeing all of the questions that are being asked in the Facebook groups. What bug is this? Good bug, bad bug. Why is this happening to my squash plants and so forth? So to try to assist and educate on different pests, I decided to take it upon myself as a master gardener to kind of go in and explain what integrated pest management is and kind of talk about the difference between organic pest management and inorganic pest management, meaning your pesticides and so forth, and kind of clear the muddy waters, so to speak. So integrated pest management is essentially just the scientific method of monitoring and responding to the pests that may present themselves in your garden. And so it breaks down as such. So the first step is going to be identification. What you want to do is you want to identify the different pests that are actually plaguing your garden. And that's going to be looking at the leaves um, and seeing any symptoms of bugs biting on your leaves or insects biting on your leaves, looking at the stems, looking at the soil around it. First step is always going to be identification. And again, in the Facebook groups and so forth, there's always people taking pictures and they're like, "Hey, good bug, bad bug." Well, instead of asking someone like other gardeners that are varying skill levels, good bug, bad bug, maybe just reach out to your local ag extension. Now, specifically here in Texas, for us, that's going to be Texas A&M. You can actually reach out and send a picture and ask the Texas Ag Extension, what is this and how do I treat it? That would be your most logical course of action when you're talking about identifying. Because I mean, if you're just submitting yourselves to the whims of the internet, you can get some random stuff out there. Some people will try to be helpful. Some people will just be, honestly, it's the internet, straight up jerks. I mean, it's funny because that kind of reminds me of a post I saw a while ago. This one young lady, and sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but you're gonna want to hear this. She apparently lived in New York, and she lived in a basement apartment. And she said, "What plants can I put in my basement apartment? I don't have any windows. I don't have any light. What plants can I put in there?" I understood where that question was going. She was like, "What are basically some low light plants that I can put in my garden? I mean, not in my garden, in my apartment to, add some plants." And oh my goodness, the comments, son, they were just ripping her apart. It was like, "Every plant needs light, you idiot. You can't live in a basement apartment if it doesn't have any windows. You have a thing about egress." Now, granted, all that is true. But that's not the point. Why are you badgering this woman? And she's coming to the community asking for help. So I did go in and I said, "Hey, you can try incorporating things like grow lights or some LED lights, and these are plants that actually do well in low light situations, like your pothos, ivies." Now, granted, she was asking about houseplants. She wasn't asking about gardening specifically, but yeah. So when you succumb yourself to the internet, you kind of get you kind of get what you get with the internet. And that's why, again, I would say reaching out to your local ag extension um, would probably be your best course of action when you're trying to identify those specific pests. Now, the next step is actually going to rely heavily on the first step. So, the first step being identify, the second is going to be evaluate. You need to evaluate what's happening with the pests that are involved. For instance, if it's aphids, are your leaves turning brown and yellowing and wilting? Um, if it's a pest like, for instance, squash vine borer, have you noticed that your squash plants right around the base or on the vines of the plants, or let's say cucumbers, if they're starting to look brown, if they have holes in them where the pest has bored in. These are the things you're going to need to evaluate what the pest is doing, because that's going to lead us to our next step. Will you try to figure out what's going to be your logical course of action? So now we've monitored, we've evaluated. Now the next logical step is going to be to prevent. All right, you need to start taking some preventive measures. All right, so this could be anything, and it depends on the species of the plant or the cultivar of the plant that you're planting. It also is going to rely on what pests we're dealing with, right? So, for instance, I'm a heavy believer in companion planting. Companion planting is something that I will scream on from the rooftops all the times, because you can use plants that are resistant to the pests that you're encountering. So, for instance, I believe in companion planting tomatoes, bell peppers, and basil together, whether it be purple basil or sweet basil. I believe in definitely planting those three together. To me, they're the holy trinity. Reason being is because the basil actually it can deter a lot of the bugs that plague, for instance, the tomato and the pepper plant, because they're both being from the nightshade family. They succumb to a lot of the same pests, and by having that basil there, it actually kind of it deters them. Now, is anything foolproof? No. There will always be some other step that you'll need to take as well. I mean, but that's just the one piece of the puzzle. Or something like planting plants that are actually native to your area. By planting your native species, they've built up a tolerance to certain pests, certain type of conditions. They have kind of had that ingrained in them through evolution. So planting native species, planting resistant cultivars of plants, these are preventive measures that you can incorporate. Then also the terrain. If, for instance, pill bugs. Now, I got a lot of slack about uh, how to cull the population of pill bugs that may be in your garden. I know pill bugs. I know pill bugs are helpful when removing heavy metals from your soil. But if you have, for instance, like a lot of wet leaves in your garden, for instance, we just had a whole heap of rain down here. If you have a lot of leaves in your garden, you're going to get a lot of pill bugs, and you're going to get a lot of snails. Well, one of the things that you can do as a preventative measure is maybe breaking up those leaves a little bit more, maybe removing the wet leaves from the environment. So you can change the conditions for your garden um, to prevent those pests from even coming in the first place. Does that make sense? All right, and now the next step is going to be an important step, as all of these are. But the next step is going to be, speaking of pests, the next step is going to be action. What actions are you going to take? Um, whether that's the incorporation of a pesticide, whether it be organic or inorganic. Um, are you going to, change your garden around? Are you going to rotate your crops? What action are you going to take? And then that leads us to the next step, because after you take action, this is the most important step, because it's going to take us back to one. Monitor. You can't go in and start trying all these different pesticides, or your neem oil, or your diatomaceous earth, or or seven dust, or anything, you know, inorganic, organic, doesn't matter. You can't go in and place all of these different measures in place and then not monitor the results. I mean, scientifically speaking, you won't know what preventative measure, what action you took actually worked. And plus, it can be very expensive if you start going to all these different preventative measures. So when you take action, the next step is going to be definitely monitoring what worked and what didn't work. Now, with that being said, talking about inorganic or organic gardening, I consider myself an organic gardener. So if someone was to ask me like, "Hey, Gray, what pest control method could I use? What pesticide could I use to combat squash vine borers?" Right? I will never, being a Texas Master Gardener, I will never specifically tell you to use product A, because one, being an extension of the local ag extension, I can't endorse a specific product uh, because that makes it seem like Texas A&M is endorsing a specific product, and that's not my goal. I can tell you, what what organic methods I've used or what preventative measures I've used, to combat them. For instance, like the squash vine borer. This is a method that I used last year and actually worked really well. I went through all the steps. I identified what the pest, not the bug, the pest that was plaguing my garden, and it was a squash vine borer. I'd seen them last season. Okay. Second, I went in and I monitored what was happening. It killed all of my squash plants. Uh, Third, I went through and I started looking at preventive measures. And then four, I took those preventive measures and I started incorporating them. What I did with my squash vine borer problem is one, I rotated my crops out. I moved them from a different place than when I was planting them before. That's always a good thing. Crop rotation is important. Two, I went in and I actually started creating barriers for the squash borers themselves because squash borers, they are a moth. They like laying their eggs in the soil. And when those eggs hatch and the mating season is over and those eggs hatch, then they start looking for something to feed on, and it's going to be your plants. So, a preventive measure is I created a whole new garden bed. I didn't have to, I just kind of wanted to. And I grew my plants indoors so they'd be nice, strong, and healthy before I transplanted them out into my garden. And then after that, and I transplanted them, I made sure I put a heavy layer of cedar mulch. And this is cedar mulch that I got from a friend. He got an abundance of mulch last year delivered to him. He couldn't use all of it. So I put that layer of mulch and weed barrier down on the top of my garden bed. And as the plant starts poking through, boom, no problem. All of the squash vine borers could not get to my squash. And I got a plethora of squash last year. So notice how I went through all the IPM methods and steps to evaluate what was happening with my plants. I didn't just throw a whole bunch of things. Uh, when I was an inexperienced gardener, I ain't gonna lie. Yeah, I did that. I just throw some diatomaceous earth down, throw some neem oil down, all these different variables. But I didn't know which one worked. But by actually monitoring and looking this from a scientific aspect, I actually ended up being successful. Now, granted, that's just my experience. Will that work again next year? Well, I'm going to have to go through the IPM steps, the integrated pest management steps, and see if this actually is successful again. And as I start getting my conclusion, well, as I start getting my results, then I can get my conclusion that, yeah, this is a method that actually works in a garden. And then after that, you just rinse and repeat. And that, honestly, is the best course of action when we're talking about handling pests in your garden. Um, Now, some of the tools that can be at your disposal are going to be, like I said before, altering the environment for the pests, um, planting those pest-resistant species, adding more native plants into your garden, um, and crop rotation. All of these steps that you're adding to this equation will um, provide you with positive results. And honestly, when it comes to IPM, the very last step that you should take is by adding a pesticide. Reason being is because we don't know how that pesticide, because, okay, as a master gardener, this is something that was always mentioned to us in class, and I always try to incorporate it in the first place, is when you're adding a pesticide to your garden, whether you want to be an organic gardener or not, you have to think about how that's going to affect one, the plants that you want to eat, that you want to consume or sell or whatever you plan on doing with them. And two, how is that going to affect the local uh, flora and fauna around you? So how is that going to affect your environment? For instance, I live with a creek behind me. So let's say that I decide to dump a whole bunch of pesticides, and I'm not going to name any specific in my garden. Well, through natural elevation and the grade of the land, those waters are going to trickle down into this creek, and then I'm affecting the water. I'm affecting the flora and fauna inside of this creek. And I love this creek. My kids play in this creek. So, and it's not just a personal or what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not just a personal mission. It's for everybody around me. I mean, look at my neighbors that live down the creek. I'm affecting them as well. So, truly, if you're thinking about pest control or you say, "Hey, I just don't have time," it won't matter. Yes, it does matter. So make sure you take the effort and go through the integrated pest management system and start incorporating that in your garden. And if you want more information, if you're specifically here in North Texas, check out, or the whole entire state of Texas actually, check out Texas A&M Ag Extension. They have more in-depth information on integrated pest management. Or if you're not in Texas and you're worldwide, check any of your, well, I don't know about worldwide because I don't know if the entire world does integrated pest management, but I know specifically here in the United States, check any of your local ag extensions, and that information is there and it's free and it's science driven. It's not just opinion, it's not somebody's thoughts on, oh, you should do this, you should do that. No, this is actually science based method of being able to control your garden or control the pests in your garden. So that's all I have to say. Um, but one thing I always like to say at the end of my videos is enjoy life, enjoy family, and enjoy your garden. Hope this information helps. See you later.
Enjoy life, enjoy family, and enjoy your garden. Thanks for watching, guys.